respectfully ask everyone to remain muted unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public safety, health, and welfare. The official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com. And a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Colleagues, being elected as a member of this body imposes an ethical obligation for each of us to enhance and maintain the public confidence in this agency. As a board of directors, it is our collective duty to our constituents, stakeholders, and staff to conduct our business in an atmosphere of mutual respect, cooperation, civility, trust, and collegiality. These are values we can all agree upon. As such, I encourage each of us to review the operating guidelines adopted by this board and to act in accordance with those principles, which are available on the Board of Directors page on the RTD website. Thank you. Ms. McManus, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank
Thanks.
you. Director Bouquet.
Present.
Director Broom.
Present.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Deschelle. Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Lewis. Director Rivera-Malpietti.
Here.
Director Rosenthal.
Present.
Director Sloan.
Here.
Director Tisdale.
Present.
Director Whitmore.
Present.
Director Williams.
Good evening. I am here.
Chair Busick.
I'm here also, and with 13 present and 2 absent, we do have a quorum. So tonight's study session is about Reimagine Rtd, and this process initially began as a 2-year effort in 2019 to evaluate and forecast the changing transportation needs of our region and to involve our customers and stakeholders in the conversation. We wanted to understand what was important to the people of the district as the agency looked to the future. It's no secret that RTD has faced many challenges in the past several years, such as workforce availability, being able to meet public and stakeholder expectations, and because of COVID-19, reduced ridership and reduced sales and use tax revenues. The agency is exploring ways to revamp our services and potentially reallocate our resources to meet the future needs of our growing district. And we hope to answer the question of what's next for RTD. General Manager and CEO Deborah Johnson, before we begin with the staff presentation, would you like to provide any comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Actually, I am starting the presentation, so if I can have members of the team pull that up, that would be wonderful.
Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you. So if we can proceed with the next slide as introduced, I'm Deborah Johnson, the General Manager and CEO. And this evening, what we will be doing is basically providing you with information, primarily focusing on the discussion on the mobility plan for the future. What I'm going to take an opportunity to do now is briefly review the elements of the system optimization plan. Following this study session, I will be distributing to the board a memorandum this evening that includes links to the most up-to-date information on the draft SOP and the mobility plan for the future. Those of you following along virtually will be able to access these materials via RTD's website by navigating to rtd-denver.com/reimagine. Once again, that's rtd-denver.com/reimagine. The draft Reimagine Rtd documents will be made widely available through extensive outreach and communication consistent with previous practice during the project. If we can proceed to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the SOP addresses short and midterm challenges that are likely to continue well into the future. including the agency's ongoing people power problems. Service priorities identified in the system optimization plan serve as the project team's North Star and help to determine what's next for RTD. The SOP contemplates the means of addressing the state of good repair across the agency and its 2,342 square mile district, which will be critical to RTD's long-term success. Next slide, please. The family of services and robust partnership program articulated in the mobility plan for the future will be initially implemented as the SOP elements are rolled out over multiple service changes. I would note that the SOP is in sync with the agency's 5-year midterm financial plan, while the mobility plan for the future is tied to a forthcoming updated long-range financial plan. Next slide, please. So the map before you shows the service subregions, which are the subject of the metrics on the next slide. So this graphic highlights metrics attributable to SOP implementation based on outcomes tied to Reimagine Rtd guiding principles such as equity and mobility. I'd like to note that the SOP provides more bus service hours per capita in all service subregions compared to current conditions. Significantly, bus service hours per equity zone capita increase in all service subregions with the system optimization plan. And then finally, equity zone populations, let me correct myself. Equity zone population access to stops with 15 minutes or better service improves in all subregions with the SOP. Going to the next slide. As noted previously, the final draft of the system optimization plan will be released later this evening at the conclusion of the study session. The board will have the opportunity to initially consider the SOP recommended action during the July 13th Operations and Safety Committee and subsequently during the July 26th board meeting. So with that information, it's my pleasure to yield this virtual floor to Holly Buck from HU to share information regarding the mobility plan for the future. Holly?
Super, thank you. So the last time we were all together, we had a discussion about the initial financial findings. And I just want to give you a quick recap of those. So what we talked about is that the initial analysis identified that prior to 2020, we knew that we were operating more service than the allocated resources. And when we talk about allocated resources, we're talking about workforce and we're talking about funding available. And then the agency was deferring the state of good repair. So long term, as we started to look into those financial projections moving forward, we found that there was limited and no capacity to grow bus and rail services, to make any substantial capital investments, or to complete any fast track segments over the next 20 years. So what we identified, and this is the bold in the bottom, was that there's a pretty significant gap between what the public and stakeholders' expectations are and what can actually be provided now and into the future. And one of the things that you all asked about is, okay, well, so what are we going to do about this? And what does this gap really look like? And how do we respond to that? So this next slide gives a bit more information on the scenarios that we have put together thus far for the mobility plan for the future. Now, there is absolutely a huge amount of detail in the financial analysis behind this, but we tried to summarize to give you the most pertinent information for tonight's meeting. So Reimagine, the mobility plan for the future always identified two scenarios. What's the fiscally constrained scenario and what does an aspirational scenario look like? We've added a third scenario to this mix because when we started to look at the fiscally constrained, we had an assumption of using DRCOG's 2050 fiscally constrained plan as the fiscally constrained plan for the work. When we got into that, we found that from a financial perspective, there was a pretty big gap in funding available and what you were able to support. So we made what we're referring to here as scenario number one, which is the RTD fiscally constrained. Now, these are not scenarios that you pick and choose from. These are more informational scenarios so you can have a good sense of what your financial picture looks like under these different scenarios. Should you not be able to attain more funding, and if you are able to attain more funding. So let's just talk through these three scenarios so we're all on the same page about it. So the first scenario, the RTD fiscally constrained, makes an assumption of about, and these are all out in 2050, of about 360,000 boardings daily for RTD. So to put some perspective on that, that's not a huge amount of growth over what you had pre-pandemic. In pandemic, you're somewhere around 200,000 boardings daily. When we move over to the DRCOG fiscally constrained plan, we've assumed a substantial amount of growth in those boardings up to about 620,000 daily. And when we go to that aspirational, we're able to achieve something around 800,000 boardings per day. Now, these are modeled numbers, and there's a lot of assumptions behind these numbers, but these are really more to give a sense of if you hold tight, if you have some growth, and if you have pretty substantial growth at the agency in your boardings. So with that, we have created proportionally, we've increased your operating capacity of all modes as we look at these scenarios. So under the first one, the RTD fiscally constrained, we've actually assumed that you're holding the SOP level of service moving forward through 2050. Now, the region is expected to grow by about 30%. So this is not an ideal way to handle responding to growth in the region and growth in travel demand, right? But what we're trying to get to here is an understanding of if you don't have any additional funding, what are you limited to in your fiscal, in your operating capacity? When we move up to the DRCOG, we've increased pretty substantially, about 70 or so percent, the operating capacity of the agency, and 92% when we go out to that aspirational scenario. And then as we move down the chart, you can see the assumptions that are made about what kind of capital investments are associated and included here. So we have new BRT routes as the third line down, and you can see that we have the 11 that are included in the DRCOG plan. And then under the aspirational scenario, we increase that to 22. And there's some differences in how the costs are handled there as well. Then we move down the line. You obviously have facilities that you need to renovate, grow, expand. If you have twice as many people riding your services, say for instance, you have more buses, you have more rail vehicles, and you have to have places to maintain and store those as well. So we've made assumptions about improvements and increases in size for those facilities. You can see the next line down is the assumptions that are made under each of these scenarios for the fast track capital investment. Then the next line down refers to the additional capital capacity investments. And you can see you don't have any under the RTD fiscally constrained, but we do have some when we move into DRCOG fiscally constrained and aspirational. And then we have one that talks about more of the emerging capital investments, emerging technologies. And this is really around trying to focus on zero emission bus and other new technologies and emerging technologies that are coming out. So the last two lines are really the meat of this chart. So what we see now, if you hold tight, you are not able to get any additional funding sources coming in the door, and we hold at that 2027 SOP level of service for RTD, By the time we get to 2050, we have about a $2 billion deficit in place. So, and we're assuming that Tabor is in place in that scenario. When we move over to the DRCOG fiscally constrained, that deficit is about $20 billion cumulative 2022 to 2050. And we have assumed at this point that the Tabor restriction has been removed, because I mean, that is such a sizable number. We're going to make the assumption that that's happened. And then when we go all the way out to the aspirational scenario, we're about 35 million in the deficit. We've also assumed there that the Tabor restriction is removed. So what do we do about that? In the DRCOG fiscally constrained plan and aspirational, we looked at a variety of different mechanisms for funding the deficits here. And really what it came down to was that sales tax was the most effective. There's a reason you use that today. But when we looked at property tax, sales tax, fares, parking fees, a whole slew of different opportunities, sales tax is really the most effective. You'd need about 0.5% under that DRCOG fiscally constrained, and a 1%, which is doubling basically what you have today to achieve that aspirational scenario. So if we want to move on to the next slide, that gives you a sense of where the financial picture lies right now. So how do we get, just to focus on the right here and the RTD fiscally constrained scenario, how do we get that balance? Because we refer to it as RTD being fiscally constrained, but you saw that there was still some deficit there, about $2 billion cumulative. So one of our initial recommendations is to remove that Tabor restriction, and that really helps get you a lot closer to being fiscally even. And then just for your reference, if we eliminate those FISA contributions, those are about 805 million between 2022 and 2050. So that also helps to balance that a bit as well. So that gives you some information on where we stand with that, and hopefully we can, take questions and if you have detailed questions, I'll probably need to get back to you on the financial analysis, but hopefully I can answer them. And then the next slide, it just steps you through the structure. I think you've seen this for the mobility plan for the future. We start on the left side where we're really setting the stage and understanding all the work that RTD and your other stakeholders have worked on throughout the years, and then the guiding principles that were adopted by the board about a year ago. Then we work through, the public engagement process and the market analysis and who do we expect to be riding as we move into the future. And then all those solutions that we considered to make sure that RTD is well structured to meet the future needs. And then the final is the mobility plan for the future, which is obviously strategies and policies that come together to guide the agency forward. When you see the memo from CEO Johnson, you'll see that there is a link to this draft. I wouldn't even yet quite call it a draft plan, but it is a draft structure. It's the framework that you will be able to click on each of these bubbles and start to get a sense of how the plan comes together in its digital format. And we'd love your feedback on that. So none of the formal recommendations are yet in the right on the mobility plan for the future part, but you'll get the framework and hopefully you'll have some feedback for us. All right. I believe Julie is going to step us through a few questions.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much. And then we'll have opportunities for questions from you as well. What I really have to do is take us back kind of up a level. So when you see the mobility plan for the future, there's a lot of detail to it, and there's a lot of tactics, and there's a lot of very specific strategies. What we wanted to really do tonight was take that all up a level and say, what should you be focused on? You are the policy board, you are the direction of this agency, and you deal with that level of issues. So we wanted to kind of quickly summarize what we see as key policy concerns. And then I'm going to run through the next 3 or 4 slides very quickly with our recommendations. But then I'm going to go back because this is really the opportunity for this study session to hear from you. My understanding is we can be a little fast and loose today, that we could actually have conversations about this. We're not necessarily going to be going to the chair for every question. We really just like people to raise their hands and engage with us and engage with each other, because these are really significant issues. And this is really, we're very excited as staff and the project team to really be able to place these in front of you and really get your thoughts. So with that, I'll talk very quickly. These are the three, when again, these aren't the only policy considerations and these aren't the only aspects of the mobility plan for the future, but these are the ones that we thought were substantial and big picture enough to really want to interface with you directly on. So the first key policy concern is varying board perspectives regarding how and where to provide service. And I don't think this will shock any of you. I mean, part of it is the nature of how RTD is structured, and you are elected officials representing geographic areas. But what that has resulted in is a little bit of a challenge in terms of clarity for what, where and when and how to provide service. So just making that really clear and sort of having a consensus opinion about that. That's something that we feel like has been a little bit challenging. And so we have some recommendations for you based on all the work that we've been doing. The second issue is what Holly's been talking about. So that is that there is a substantial long-term funding gap. I think a lot of us, when we started this project, we were very optimistic. We were thinking the numbers are really going to start turning around once you pay off some of the remaining debt. Unfortunately, what we're seeing with the nature of the growth and the operational expenses, and just when you put all these in the state of good repair, when you put all these pieces together, we are, as Holly just walked through, looking at a pretty substantial long-term funding gap. And then the third, we also highlighted as well, one of the most significant findings throughout this entire multi-year effort is just the level of expectations that is put on RTD from your public and your stakeholders versus really what you can afford and what you can provide, what you can afford financially, but what you also you can provide from a workforce perspective, because obviously workforce still ends up being first and foremost in terms of our challenges today. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Like I said, I'm going to walk through these recommendations quickly, but then we're going to go back to each of these and really have an opportunity for a discussion. So as I go through these next couple of slides, love for you to be thinking about, hey, could you support this as an RTD board member? Are these recommendations you could support? If not, why? And are we missing anything? Is there something that you really just feel like should be addressed in terms of recommendations to address these key policy concerns? So we'll start off with varying board perspectives. Our recommendations, and I don't think this will shock you, is we did a lot of work around the SOP. We feel like there was a lot of feedback. We got over 1,600 comments. We've got a lot of feedback from a lot of different organizations. We feel like there's a good framework there. We hope that the board will support that. And we do think that that's a foundation that you can kind of build on. The second piece that we heard loud and clear from all of our outreach is a lot of consensus and a lot of positive support for this concept of equity populations. So really, when you say, where do we provide service first? Well, we really look at these equity populations and where we have the highest concentrations of them, and we're trying to put that service in. And a lot of that came, as you know, we started this project and then the pandemic hit. And really, I think the message that came out loud and clear from what we saw during the pandemic was these are the groups that need the service the most. These are the groups that hung on with you during the pandemic and are still riding the system and still need the system. The third would be looking at a high capacity, high quality regional backbone service. So it's sort of the R in RTD being the regional piece. That is what RTD brings to the table. That is RTD's greatest strength, is that connectivity. You've got an enormous service area. So the way you lay out sort of that backbone that everything can connect to is really absolutely essential from the project team's recommendations to really make sure that that is a high priority for you. And then the last couple, and we're going to talk about this a couple of times, it is the project team's recommendation and our vision that there's really some great partnership opportunities, especially when you get to that community service, first mile, last mile, hyper local sort of routes. There's great opportunities for partnering. And we've got some suggestions on how to structure that in the mobility plan for the future. And then finally, you've heard this term quite a bit from us, this concept of the Mobility Integrator. So this is this concept that RTD in the future, 2050, you're not providing every type of multimodal option out there, but you are in a role where you are presenting that in a way to the public so that they can, so it's very seamless. So if they're trying to get from point A to point B, there's maybe 3 or 4 options. There's micro transit options. Maybe you can catch a scooter here from the station. Again, RTD not operating all of that, not owning all of that, but RTD being that sort of umbrella organization that presents it to stakeholders and your customers as a very seamless opportunity and seamless way to plan your travel. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to the varying board perspectives next. Number 2, substantial long-term funding gap. I think we talked about that second bullet, that removing the taper restrictions. That is something that you will see as a formal recommendation from your project team and staff here, because that is, as Holly said, even if you get no additional funding, you really still need to do everything you can to remove those taper restrictions to continue holding on to the funding that you have by 2050. So we feel like that's an important piece. Another important piece is prioritizing state of good repair. I think we've all seen over the last few decades, not just RTD, but transit agencies across the country and across the world, it's tough to prioritize, boring things like maintaining facilities versus exciting things like opening new lines and things like that. But the reality, and I think you guys feel this as well, as an organization, that you recognize that you got to stay on top of it because it can start impacting the operations of your system. And it also can, it gets more expensive. The longer you wait to fix something, the more expensive it is. So really our recommendation is prioritize that state of good repair, try to debruce your TABOR, and then look at increasing sales tax. What sort of opportunity we have to increase sales tax? And then this partnership program that I introduced in the last slide, this idea of setting it up, almost think of kind of Dr. Cog's process, where you have a call to projects and you have criteria, and you maybe carve away, a small part of your operating funds every year so that you can really identify these partnership opportunities for the first mile, last mile, hyper local service, and really good, seeking those opportunities to do that in the most cost-effective manner. And then finally, just obviously keeping our eyes and ears open, because there have been a lot of opportunities, especially from a sustainability perspective, to really look at opportunities for federal grants, state grants, private sector money, especially, related to sustainability and anything else, obviously. But we do recognize that there are funds out there and that RTD should be seeking those opportunities as well. So those are our thoughts on long-term funding. And then the very last one gets to the stakeholder expectations. We recognize right now we have 3A and 3B. The reason we organize like this is in 3A, we are as a project team recommending go out and get more money. But we also recognize that's a real challenge right now. And so 3B, which we'll talk about, is, well, what happens if you as a policy board decide maybe not to go out and get additional funding, or you try and it doesn't work out. So under this scenario, we recognize workforce. That is the biggest challenge that the agency is facing right now. And it is impacting a lot of the ability to meet everyone's expectations because it's impacting the service levels. I know there's a lot of work that you're doing in these areas. We're excited about the new collective bargaining unit agreement. So we think there's a lot of good progress in that area. What we as a project team are recommending is seeking funding to achieve that aspirational financial scenario. So that is the biggest, the boldest, the most impact. It provides you with the most operating funds, provides you with the most options in terms of capital expansion and addressing capital concerns. Here's the challenge, though, and I don't think this is going to surprise you, but we are looking at this at a high-level planning level. We're looking at daily boardings and big picture cost estimates associated with this. If you as a policy board decide to move forward, the recognition is they'll have to be very specific in defining what that looks like. And so as a project team, what we're saying is you really need to look at, especially when you're talking capital investments, you really need to look at those success outcomes. So as a board, in partnership with our stakeholders and our regional partners, what does success look like? What are we trying to achieve with these different capital projects? And then that allows the board to make some hard decisions around, well, what is it that needs funding, and what is it that you can afford, and what is it that you should prioritize? So this idea of working in the region to refine this aspirational scenario in a way that makes sense, that sets a clear vision in terms of outcomes, and allows for opportunities for buy-in. So what we are recommending is a pretty robust outreach effort to really develop clear messaging. We've heard that from the board. If we're going out for additional funds, we need to have clear messaging on the benefits of that. A lot of that comes from what you would include in that aspirational scenario. And then our final slide on this is what happens if you decide not to move forward, or heaven forbid you move forward and it doesn't work out. That's when we feel as a project team, what we would recommend is you have to make some hard choices and you have to communicate those. So under this scenario, you don't have funding for expansion. You don't have funding to complete fast tracks. You don't have funding to do a lot of the capital expansion you'd like to do. This is when you really have to say, okay, this is the best we can do at this time, is to focus on the regional backbone resources, serving the highest demand areas, really keeping those equity populations in mind, and really only extending services when you have that transit supportive development, when you have the land use density. That's where you would look to expand services. That partnership program we talked about would convert to more of a RTD would supply what funds that they have, but you would be very limited in funding. And so a lot of that would actually have to be paid for and potentially even operated by the local communities and jurisdictions. And then the main thing, I think, from our recommendation, if you're under this scenario, would be to clarify this, to tell people, because right now there is certainly something we got from the SOP comments is there's expectations out there that are well beyond what you're, even with all the money in the world, what you're ever going to be able to address. You received comments that said, you need to pick me up at my door and drop me off at my office. You need to solve all the world's problems when it comes to GHG and all the rest of it, all things that you absolutely want to contribute to, but you have to recognize under this scenario, you wouldn't be able to do some of that, and you'd have to clarify that. So with that, we've done a lot of talking. I want to zip back, and we're going to start by talking about the varying board perspectives, but I also want to open up the opportunity for any board members that have questions about anything we've presented so far. But then I would love to dive in and get your perspectives on what do you think about these recommendations related to how and when you provide service.
Thanks
Please,
for
Director
that.
Davidson. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, Chairman Busick.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the directors to raise their hands and be respectful of other directors that may have questions, and don't ask 9 questions at once. We can always circle back. So Director Davidson, why don't you go ahead first?
Terrific.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I thank you for the presentation so far. I do have a series of questions about the financial scenarios. I'll keep them tight. We'll see how we go here, and I can come back around, Chair, to your point. So just backing up to the financial scenarios, just to help get rooted in the assumptions. We're going through a fair study and equity analysis right now. Just curious, when looking at the number of boardings, what fare levels did you generally assume? Did you model in any growth? Did you model in any decrease? Were you using current fare structure in terms of modeling out our revenue based on boardings?
Yeah, I can give you, Holly Buck, FHU, I can give you some more information. We were pretty conservative, knowing that the fare study is looking to decrease the impact of fares to the user. So a likely outcome is not a giant increase in fares. But I don't have the numbers off the cuff. But yes, it was a conservative, and it does grow based on the fact that ridership is growing, but the amount per person is not commensurate with that.
Great. Okay, thank you. Even just that general comment of the conservative and erring on that side is very helpful. Chair, if I may, just a few other ones that I think might be
Go ahead,
quick.
Eric. Yeah, you bet.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Another comment that was made was that we looked at sales tax as being the most effective
Yes.
rather than property tax as well as others. I'm just wondering, could you comment, with property tax in particular, was that anything to do with complexity of implementation and management, political feasibility of will, the actual amount, and the return on investment? What was the reasoning that sales was more effective?
You're right. It was based on amount of money. So what we found in the analysis was that it would take several of the other funding sources put together to even with bringing several of them together, it didn't meet the deficit that we were identifying. The easiest way, so that's not to say that you don't want to do it, but the easiest way was following the same path that you're on today. You're only trying to increase the sales tax versus trying to bring it in from many different angles. So sort of complexity of doing it another angle and the amount that you're able to come up with from the sales tax.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you. And just another quick one, because I think I know the answer to this. I think we're all aware that, the initial intent of fast tracks in the ballot language was to roll back the 0.4% portion to only what's required for operation and maintenance once all capital projects are complete. Obviously, the story has changed quite a bit with our cost structure. I'm assuming that you didn't model in any decrease to the 0.4% regardless of the completion of fast tracks, given that we would likely need this for operations and maintenance of fast tracks. Is that a fair assumption that we didn't roll any, we remained at 1% through 2050?
You remain at 1% through 2050, and even more so, your base system, your 0.6 is actually funding fast tracks. So
Right.
you're not, coming down on that fast track side. The base system is being moved over to get to that even level.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I have another question, but I think it's a broader one and relates to some of the discussion to follow. So I'll yield the floor, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for entertaining multiple questions. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Director Davidson. You were quick. Director Rivera-Melchietti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Holly and your team, thank you so much. This is really a great presentation. I want to talk about a couple of things in terms of clarity. I think that you're right. We've got to be absolutely clear about what we are dealing with today and looking at the new world in which we're living after the pandemic and the workforce changes with more people working from home who are white collar workers. I guess as I looked at all of your components in terms of improving customer service and partnering, I think other elected officials will have a huge role in partnering with us to disseminate information and options to their communities. And I guess from my perspective, I am more concerned about the state of good repair, because if we don't have viable service available, new service won't work at all, because we will have kind of missed the whole point. I have a question about, did you all look at all about making RTD a smaller geographic footprint? Because I think that one of the big issues is the geographic footprint that we serve, which is huge. And let me just go one more and say, when you're talking about grants and other funding opportunities, could we look at health grants and climate change grants because of the impact that transit has in terms of climate and health for folks getting out of their cars, not doing all of those things where we can really show the impact of transit in those two areas. And that might be a whole new bucket of dollars that we never thought of before. But one of the other biggest issues for me is doing a realistic communications plan, because I think you are absolutely right. I think people are going to be really disappointed thinking that we're going to do all of this brand new, innovative, and we really need to be very realistic out of the chute, saying, here's what we have. This is how we need to work together to move forward for all communities. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Director Rivera-Melchietti. Director Cook.
Yeah, as I understand it, we're going to have discussion in a bit. So I just have one quick question on your slide 11 that you had up a bit ago. regarding the BRT, and in both scenario 1 and 2, you show 11 new BRT routes, but no RTD capital or additional operating costs. Does that mean somebody else is operating them, or where the funding has come? What's that part mean?
I can pop in here, Holly Buck, FHU. The 11, so the DRCOG fiscally constrained plan, the assumption in there is that then those are the 11 that we're talking about that are already identified in that DRCOG plan. That their RTD does not have, so those are just RTD's costs. RTD does not have any capital investment in those. So those are coming from local communities or federal grants of some sort. And that the operating costs, they don't incur any incremental operating costs over what they're providing today. So, you know, if you were to look at, say, Federal Boulevard, as using Federal Boulevard as an example, putting BRT along Federal Boulevard, there would be no incremental additional operating costs. There's already a lot of service on the ground. That service would be translated into a BRT route, but it wouldn't be, you know, twice as much service, say, as what's happening. So those are the assumptions that are in the background.
It seems like there's a pretty good match on federal. I'm not so sure that would be the case on all the 11. Is that true? Are there some where there'd be a sizable operating?
That is the assumption that is in, my understanding is that's the assumption that's in the DRCOG financial plan today.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have not changed that for this. And as you can see, as you know, there wasn't, I think if we would have looked and seen that there was some money coming available, that absolutely would have been an early priority to put money towards some of those BRTs. But there's, you know, as you can see from this, there wasn't money to put over there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Director Cook. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have what I believe are 4 questions, maybe none if I can't talk. One thing, if you would look please to packet page 10. I think it's your slide 10, or maybe it's not slide 10. I'm not sure which number it is, but it's the one that shows the SOP network. Yes, just before, there we are, that one. And I recognize perhaps this relates more to the SOP than the mobility plan for the future. But in looking at that chart, if you look at the second row, the middle set, bus service hours per equity zone capita. I was wondering if someone could explain to me what is going on where Boulder presently and as contemplated is twice the service hours per equity zone capita than the other regions, except a little less than twice for the Southeast.
I can pop in here. Holly Buck, FHU. So part of what you'll see here, and I don't have a calculation for this, so maybe as you've brought this up, this would be a good to have information on. Boulder does buy some additional service, so they have some additional service that comes through that way. I cannot tell you though that is actually proportional. I'm not sure of that because I don't have that number, but that might be something that we should look into and give you some information on that. The other thing that you'll see when you look to the left, the charts to the far left, that the Boulder County area, that entire subregion just has a very low volume of social equity, anybody identified as a social equity zone group. So when you go to that per capita number, you know, it shoots up pretty high.
Okay, I understand that. That's helpful. Thank you. And again, this is not a pop quiz. I expect that some of these questions will be taken under advisement and further information can be made available, because an additional question as relates to this chart, and I want to preface this question with an important disclaimer. Ridership is not the sole metric, and we should never be entirely dependent upon ridership, and I think our strategic plan begins to effectuate some of that thought, and it's important. I would like to know, however, if in looking at the SOP network illustrations you have here, there was any consideration as to the ridership per zone, at least as another data point that we might look at when considering these questions.
Yeah, so we did not model, we didn't use the travel demand model to look at the ridership for this particular SOP. We did look at it when developing the SOP, and we used that to inform how the SOP routes were designed. So when you see the focus on the backbone network and trying to focus service on more access, 15-minute access to social equity populations, that came from the modeling. And the modeling, and I don't know if I'm going to get this right off the top of my head, but the modeling indicated that this focus we could achieve about a 15% increase over what we would have achieved if we did not take this path. So you should see some pretty substantial increases in ridership using the design standards that have been put in place for the SOP.
All right, thank you for that. Then an informational point, and then one final question. The informational point is, in 2018, we had in excess of 97 million annual boardings. That works out to about 269,000 boardings per day. And I note that in looking at even the RTD fiscally constrained, we're significantly below that number. And it's just an observation. You know, we note, for example, about 200,000 daily boardings in 2020, which was down significantly from what we had in 2018, which is the last year as to which I had easy access for those data. The last question is, in terms of looking at the various plans, have we taken into account what our bonding capacity would be through 2050? Are we, and I apologize for not remembering this immediately, but are we in fact fully bonded out through 2050, or don't we have a significant tranche that retires before 2050?
Yeah, I don't, is there any chance that Doug is out on the line? We have had those discussions, and I can get more specific information, but I don't dare quote it right now because I don't have it in front of me. I fear I'll get it wrong. So, but we have been working with Doug McLeod on that.
All right, thank you. And that's very helpful. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to go on with those points. That's all I have at this moment.
Thanks, Director Tisdale. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the team. Just one question, and it may be, again, one that you don't have at your fingertips, but the first recommendation was prioritize state of good repair. I think we all realize the importance of that. Did we quantify that in some way? Are we going to an industry target? Is it what's our target, and how does that compare with what other agencies carry?
Yeah, I probably can't give you all the details on how this is calculated, but yeah, there are a lot of industry standards. Your RTD staff has a very detailed list of, this vehicle is this old, it has this many miles on it, and it needs to be replaced. And it's for every bit of all of your facilities and everything that you own. So there's a lot of detail out there, and they know, from the FTA standards that a bus is typically replaced every 12 years, for instance. So yes, they have very good information on that, and it is all quantified, and that's what was used and put into the financial model.
Thank you.
Thanks, Director, First Vice Chair Geisinger. Director Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question may be a little bit straddling the line between what's been presented so far and some of the discussion yet to come. But one notion I know that's come up in the Reimagine meetings with the community has been this concept of regional connectivity and local partnerships for local transportation, which I know is something that you also mentioned in the presentation about local partnerships. Director Rivera-Melpiedi asked an interesting question about whether you considered scenarios that reduce the footprint of RTD. Just a question as we look at these financial scenarios and as we consider that feedback, I realize it's not what's presented here, but did we spend any time modeling or looking at an increase in available revenue to transit, but perhaps that going to local partners where RTD scales back its focus in some areas and leans on local partnerships? I'm just wondering how far, perhaps I'm not asking the question very well, but how far we went down the path of modeling or considering the idea that RTD actually reduces some responsibility, maintains current funding level, and the inherent assumption in that is that local partners are able to generate more funding for service. Did we go that far as to consider models given the feedback we had received?
So, I mean, we didn't do, well, that's not totally true. We did a bit of modeling around that, where we looked to say, if RTD were able to put in this really robust partnership program, put some money towards it, how much additional money could they bring in from local partners? Not that they're trying to bring it in, but bring it into the whole region's transit network, and try to serve, to better serve the needs that way. So we did look at that some. And one thing, you know, I didn't say when we talked about that RTD fiscally constrained plan, is that, you know, I talk about it being the SOP levels of service, but likely by the time, you know, if you were to do that, by the time you get to 2050, the network by just default is going to have to look different than what it looks like today to meet the needs better, to do anything effectively. So you probably do start to see less of RTD's money going to those local services, and you're really more focused on that, you know, putting the R back in RTD, as I think Julie said earlier. So, you know, that's where those partnerships could come into place and generate some additional funds for the region's service.
Okay, thank you very much, Holly and Julie, and thanks for commenting on that, and thank you, Mr. Chair, appreciate it.
You bet. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one of the items that stuck out at me was, and maybe I heard it or saw it wrong, but this concept of if we no longer contribute to the FISA account, and if that money instead went to operations, and so how would we theoretically cut that Gordian knot? To, I mean, would we have to go to the voters? I mean, this is maybe beyond your purview, but, you know, and so would that be a constitutional issue? Because is that raising a tax? Because it's kind of like raising it in one spot and eliminating it in another, or is it more of a statutory, or what do you think?
So, Julie, I might ask you to jump in here, but my understanding of the FISA is that that was internally directed by RTD in an attempt to support building some of the fast track system that was not able to be built because of financial constraints. So I don't think there's anything voter related that has to occur there, other than the board would have to agree that that is what you want to do. Julie, is that accurate?
That is my understanding as well. When the FISA was originally established, it was literally an internal mechanism of how you're tracking your dollars to make sure that these dollars would be available over the long term. So I agree with Holly. I do not believe there is a statutory or anything related to the overall ballot initiative. It was an internal decision in terms of how RTD wanted to track those operational funds.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Great, thanks for that. Director Davidson again, last time.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to react to that, just to remind everybody, because I know in the 3B recommendation, there was a note of, you know, in the financially constrained scenario, not completing fast tracks. While I wouldn't be the right one to comment on the legal ramifications. I just want to be mindful for the board here that there is language in the hold harmless agreement that does specify need for certain types of hearings. So we just need to be mindful as we, to Director Rosenthal's point, as we have comments around that. I think we should consider that with legal counsel and be diligent about the way we consider those scenarios. Thank you very much.
You bet. Good point. So I have a couple comments, maybe a question. So with regard to the seeking other funding, I'll have to say that Director Broom has been banging this drum louder and longer than anyone with regard to our need to find a more reliable and predictable source of funding other than an economy-driven sales tax revenue base, which is good sometimes and bad sometimes. So I'd love to see if it's possible. You indicated there was an analysis done that showed the 1% sales tax increase, if that happened, far outshone other forms of revenue. If it's possible, I'd like to see what was considered and what those numbers looked like. And secondly, one of the comments is going to be on the varying board perspectives of, and I guess it goes to the SOP and the mobility plan of the future, the prioritizing service to equity populations in highest concentrated areas. And I've been banging this drum too, and I know you guys have heard me that equity populations exist everywhere, right? And transit dependent people don't just need bus service where they live, they need it where they need to get to, right? And they need to get to work and things like that aren't within the 5-mile radius of their home. And in fact, many of these employment centers are moving out of the core of the city center where a lot of these equity populations reside. So that's something I think we need to continue to talk about. And Director Tisdale brought up the issue of it can never be only about ridership. And I think the flip side of that is it also needs to be about coverage, right? You've got to have that balance of ridership and coverage. So I'll keep banging that drum. So that's all I have for now. Director Rosenthal, go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick thought as well that I don't think was really brought up is, to the extent that, we're receiving funding from the legislature for August for a zero fare month. And I'm curious as to, whether we could say to the legislature, look, we do need, funding in the future for maybe a specific projects to say, look, we will create these, community, connections with, maybe local providers and things like that. So maybe you could help fund that. So maybe we should also consider, a regular ask to the legislature every year, as long as we have, a project or something that they would hopefully deem, possible and necessary. Thanks.
Thanks for that comment. And that raised another question that I have had. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, but are there other transit agencies similar in whatever way to RTD that receive regular funding from their state or city as part of their funding source? And are we kind of an exception that the state doesn't give us anything?
Yeah, so I can pop in here on this one. I don't want to use any numbers again, but yes, there are a lot of agencies that do receive state funds. And we have some data on that we can, I think, provide from our analysis of existing conditions. So we can.
Great. I'd love to see that. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Director Cook, you're back up.
Thank you. I thought I'd add some comments relative to what you and Director Rosenthal had offered. I think it's a really good point that we need to take into account destinations. And I understood that there was going to be an FTA circular coming out pretty soon. Have we been able to anticipate that and work toward that? That's the first thing. The second thing is this there's a problem with, continuing over time to prioritize service to equity population's highest concentrated areas, because the cost of living in those core areas is driving them, dispersing them, as it were. And so I think you could see over time serving fewer and fewer and fewer, and seeing others who have been moved out into lower cost of living areas unserved. So that's a conundrum. And do you have any thoughts about how to address that gentrification?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think we talk about this a lot in the meeting, and I think it's really important to know that the service development group, Jesse Carter's group, they're always looking at the latest information on social equity populations and where they live. So it's not a static data set. Now, granted, it's a giant amount of data, so it's not up to the date that day, but that is being updated regularly for the census. So we use the census and always the latest census to look at where people are moving. And you see when people, there's concentrations of people moving around. So it is always trying to keep up with the latest information that is available, understanding that there is, and that's, there's changing travel patterns as well.
So Holly, does that mean that we'll unwind service frequency in areas where that concentration is decreased in our zero-sum scenario here, in order to increase areas?
Right.
That's not what you're proposing, right?
I think, when you look at what the service development group does, they put things in and they're evaluating them all the time. It's pretty unusual to see something go down in service frequency, but not impossible. Certainly, they do look, if it's not meeting their service standards, they are bringing that back down to meet to be within the service standards and have a service frequency that meets the demand that is out on the street. So yes, it's not unreasonable it's always an evolving, somebody referred to it as an art and a science.
And then how about the destinations? How do you see those being factored in more and more?
Yeah, so the destinations, just so a couple things, and we don't have any destinations on the mobility plan for the future. So let's just speak to this in the system optimization. We do, but that's 2050. So let's just talk about the system optimization plan. So we have two things that are happening there. One, we use all the data, everything that's on the ground today, jobs, employment, and household population are all in the model and all taken into account in our system optimization plan analysis. And there's actually another graphic that we did not include in this SOP network that's on, I think it was maybe slide 7, that talks about jobs and access to jobs. And then the other thing that we did was, you'll recall, we used the location-based services data. So this is where people have cell phones and we can see where, it's a little bit creepy, but you can see where people live and where they work, and then the other trips that they make as well. And it's a pretty amazing amount of data, and it's great. But so what we could see there, and what a lot of the recommendations that were made in the system optimization plan were specifically looking at those we looked at all data, all people, but we also looked specifically at social equity groups. And we said, here is where they're living, that we know they live there from the census. And we can take all the cell phones in that census block, and we can see where they're going, where are they traveling, where are they going to work. That was particularly important to us, to make sure that the routes that we were recommending were aligned with where the people were living and working, so that they could make those connections. So we had two pretty great data sets to use to understand those travel patterns and specifically that destination end.
So should this read prioritize service to equity population's highest origin and destination areas or something is a question. Thank you.
I think that's a fair statement, because with the LBS data, we were able to track residents as well as, where they were traveling for work and things like that. So that's a great point.
That sounds like it would be more accurate. Thanks for those questions and for your use of the word conundrum. Director Williams, you're next.
It is a good word, and I'm appreciative of all the work that a lot of people have put into this. But I am unhappy because I don't see here included the discussion that I hear all around me every day in all of the places that I live and breathe, that has to do with greenhouse gas and our future, and the fact that everybody has to get out of their car. They have to get out of their single occupancy vehicle. And when they do that, the number one place that they have to go is to RTD. Doesn't matter if they're in Boulder and they don't have a train, or if they're in Parker and they don't like us. The fact of the matter is that in the next immediate future, not 2050, not even 2030, but in the next couple of years. And I first of all, I don't see it anyplace on this slide. And generically, I don't see it reflected in the planning that we are doing. And granted, ridership's gone down and things have changed and there's drugs in Union Station, but this is a fact of life. And we are, the bottom two lines maybe address that somewhat, that we need to partner to provide community service and we need to act as a mobility integrator. But what I'd like to have is another line on there that says, hey, people, we're it. You got to get out of your car. So I just need to say that, everybody's beating their drum, and look at Julie and Holly are laughing because it's not, they've heard me beat this drum. So thank you for allowing me the chance to add some greenhouse gas, clean air, zero fare to climate change to this discussion.
So Kate, Director Williams, I do want to pop in and just say that I did not refer to it as this, but when we talked about, I think on slide 11, that aspirational scenario, we had in our minds, in trying to put that together, what can we do that's like sort of the biggest thing that we can do? So, the modeling in the background to get to this 800,000 number those are big. It is a lot of service, a lot of investment. And the idea and what we had in mind was trying to achieve some of those, support achieving some of those goals, and see if what RTD can do to help with that.
Thanks, Director Williams. Was that it? Thanks so much. RTD is the green option. Director Rivera-Malpiedi.
Yes, let me start by saying that the Avalanche are 2-0. Woo! So that's exciting news. But I do want to talk about a couple of things. And one of the things that I keep thinking about, and thinking about what Director Williams was talking about in terms of greenhouse gases and stuff, is that this is our time to have the opportunity to really kind of showcase our leadership in terms of the whole transportation industry. And perhaps this is the time we need to hold this summit with our key elected officials across our region to talk about the realities of what we're dealing with and the partnerships we need to bring together, and how can we be working together for the good of the entire community. I just think that, when this board started working towards changing RTD and bringing in a new general manager and looking at Reimagine Rtd and looking at the realistic things that we are dealing with, this is also our opportunity to stand up and say, you know what, we need to be working together. And so we're going to be calling a summit, for instance, to come together and develop strategies on how we move forward to achieve the best transit service for the entire region. I just think this would be an opportunity, and that communication and developing strategies is probably the most crucial thing in my mind, because if we serve, and I've always said this, if we serve our most vulnerable communities, then we will have achieved being able to serve the entire population. So I would just like to put that out there. Thank you so much. And go apps.
Thanks for those comments and that update. Second Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I agree with Director Rivera-Malpiedi that we would really need to have a summit. And I hate to be a wet blanket, but some of the things I'm hearing with regard to any kind of a tax increase for RTD is a non-starter for a number of our, not only our partners, but the general public. And so I'm thinking that if we were to hold a summit and rally around the realities of the RTD situation, it would be a good place to start with that political discussion, because I mean, the aspirational scenario is basically doubling the tax that we already have, which people are already grumbling about. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done for RTD to build back the trust of the traveling public. Number one, in order to increase ridership, and number two, to have any chance at all of getting something like that passed. So again, sorry to be the wet blanket, but.
Thanks for those comments. Director Bouquet.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, and I don't know if we're just kind of taking it as, you know, silence means yes, but I did want to just kind of vocalize as a director that I would support the recommendations of the staff when it comes down to, you know, prioritizing, you know, equity populations. You know, I know there's been a couple questions, you know, from, you know, regarding where, you know, potentially where these populations are going to be going, you know. And potentially it sounds like from, you know, Chair Busick's and Director Cook's kind of questions that, you know, maybe kind of rewording that. But I just wanted to kind of point that out. And I am curious if there are any other directors who would be going against that viewpoint, or, you know, is this kind of what our vision is going forward, is truly taking care of the backbone of our system? Because I think that's, you know, going to be going to how we build, you know, good faith with our community partners. And, you know, I'm all for community partnerships. And I think it is maintaining the organization and, you know, our established routes as they are, you know, and then looking forward to, you know, expanding upon it. But, you know, I would be just kind of interested to hear from other directors if there's other proposed solutions to it, or, you know, again, is silence yes. And, you know, we as a board are supporting the idea of backing our equity populations. That would just be my only comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Bouquet. Director Broom.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple thoughts. You know, throughout the evening, we've talked about partnering with cities and other people to provide local transportation. The one thing, where's that money going to come from, like at the city level? The gas tax is a dying breed. I mean, if everybody's going to be driving around in electric vehicles, you know, there won't be any grants coming from Dr. Cog anymore, because that's where they, you know, they're distributing funds. The sales tax is also suspect. You know, people, more and more of what you spend is spent on services that's not taxable. It's going to take a huge change in our tax system to cover transportation costs going forward. We probably need to look at the income tax, quite frankly. That doesn't sound very attractive to a lot of people, but over half of the people in Colorado don't pay income taxes. And so it'd be maybe an easy target to go after in an election. Those people, you could just say, well, it's not going to cost you anything. We just need to have more conversations with the cities and the counties as to how they plan on financing transportation in the future, so that we're not at crosswise with them when we get ready to go to the voters. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Broom. Appreciate those comments. I'm going to go to Director Whitmore, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We keep talking about the necessity for partnerships, and we have some. This question is kind of related to the former question about comparing to other agencies. Certainly, we don't need the answer tonight, but partnerships with local entities mean more commitments of monies from local entities. I'm just curious, since we don't seem to have much financial support from the state, other agencies do. What is the going model for partnership numbers in other thriving transit agencies? Again, I don't need a quick answer tonight, but it just seems like we talk about partnerships. The partnerships mean money and local commitment. What is the model that works, and is there any ability to flesh that out with our local partners? Obviously, I think number one priority to do this is trust, and we are certainly working on that each and every day. So just a thought, I'd entertain input on it, or it can be delayed for later discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Great, thanks for the questions, and Ms. Skeen and Ms. Buck, if you have that data available, you can get that to us down the road. That'd be great. First, Vice Chair Geisinger.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hearing a lot of pieces that I think are really interesting and thought-provoking about different ways that we might raise money or have a summit to consider different ways. And it reminded me that, a couple of years ago, there was a series of discussions at the state level. And I think going into the big funding bill, SB 260, that funded transportation, the conclusion was that it would take a lot of different pieces. It may be fees, as Director Broom has mentioned several times, maybe a combination with, debrucing, requests to the state, local partnerships. But I think putting some thought at a variety of pieces, it could be another tax, but, we're not going to get, I tend to agree with Director Catlin, that's going to be tough as a single way of funding. So I would just encourage us to think about sort of a building block approach. Thanks.
Thank you, First Vice Chair Geisinger. Director Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to react to a couple of directors here, and Director Bouquet, I heard you that you were looking for, some consensus or comment. I did want to just kind of love the idea of the summit, because I want to talk a little bit about the local partnership piece, and Director Broom asked the question of, where some of that money might come from. I think one concern I have is certainly very supportive of the fact that as a transit agency, we need to focus on folks who don't own cars that are on our system, and on equity populations who are in that situation as a matter of need. I have a growing concern that as we continue to focus on concentration, the way our region has grown, which is out of control of this agency, is such that, folks not only have been pushed out, which is something we've talked about, but are sprinkled throughout the region. And it's a difficult conversation, because as we've scaled back, we have folks who have lived in areas for quite some time. I've heard from numerous, actually, just within the last few weeks, who kind of have this sense of death by 1,000 cuts. So we have to just be very thoughtful, I think, in terms of how we address the need of folks who need us. I think local partnerships is a thing that we need to talk about. Going for a tax, to Director Catlin's point and Director Geisinger's emphasis, is going to be really difficult as RTD and statewide. Local, I don't want to get out in front of my skis of what polls have shown in individual cities, but there is some reason to believe that some cities, at least throughout the region and counties, may be able to raise additional funds locally, which is why I asked my earlier question about whether we considered any models of funding moving towards them. Case in point, we have entire areas of areas I'm very familiar with. Please don't take me as being parochial. I know them much better. We have areas of Broomfield, areas of Erie that have no coverage at all. And we do have folks who require service. just this past week, I had the pleasure of working with one such individual, does not own a car, needs access to work at a Walmart, doesn't have coverage, and the city and county of Broomfield was able to deliver to her Easy Ride service, which is a locally funded service for folks who are over the age of 60 or folks with disabilities that are over the age of 18. And I just wanted to emphasize that because I think that the notion of a summit, finally, I'll just react to Director Rivera-Malpietti, is a very good one, that we may want to dialogue with some folks in the region who may have data on what their cities might be willing to do, might be interested in doing, where I think the word of trust was brought up, where trust may be higher than what we have as RTD. And that comes to a bullet on here that really jumps out at me, which is operating this high capacity, high quality regional backbone service, leading hand in hand with local partners and perhaps local agencies down the road. I think we need to really dig into that as a board to address this matter. Thank you very much. I'll stop my chattering. Thank you.
Thanks for the chatter. Director Cook.
Yeah, thanks. Director Davidson brought up the idea of partnerships. This is the one area where I have some hope based on examples we've seen. The one I like to talk about right now is that Smart Commute Metro Norris Flex Ride. You know, they proposed service in an area that didn't have service. They did some good analysis, worked with Dr. Cog to identify origins and destinations, and then we're able to tweak that service so that now it's just very successful. Do we know how the partnership framework is going to be set up? Do you guys have any detail on that? Is that going to be in something that we're going to see later? Or, I mean, because the devil's in the details on this. If it's going to be onerous, if we're going to devolve the entire responsibility to the local communities, and if I asked that question at Dr. Cog, will you, if we go to this scenario, and it's what we're forced to rest on, is partnerships as one way to expand service, will you, Dr. Cog, be able to shift your funding toward the local communities? And there was some agreement, but I didn't hear a firm commitment to that. So what are you all anticipating for that partnership piece?
So I can jump in here. Right now, it's still draft. Right now, the partnership structure is set up to have an annual call for projects. The initial recommendation that, of course, has not gone to the board yet to see if you would approve it, but is the idea that the board every year would identify a portion of perhaps your operating budget or some amount of money that would go into this to fund this grant program. And then it would be, and it could, the partnerships come through that grant program. They're evaluated. Everybody submits through just kind of like you would do an FTA grant of sorts, perhaps not that onerous. And then they're evaluated by RTD staff based on a set of criteria and selected to move forward with. And then the RTD, of course, would continue to support the partners with technical analysis and all of the other good stuff that goes with it.
So do you see, I'm so sorry, I interrupted. Do you see the criteria echoing the policies we're setting here? Because I would hope we could loosen up a little bit in order to allow the opportunity for innovation and service delivery in areas that we aren't prioritizing, but that have some promise if they're, if the locals can identify a way to do it.
Right. Again, it's all very draft, but the criteria that we have set out follow the guiding principles that were set forward for this project and adopted by the board. So they follow that, but I think that we can bring those and we can have more discussion about that.
Because to Director Williams's point, we have this broader concern with greenhouse gas emissions, and that will require attracting choice riders, I think, especially sometimes when they live in far outlying areas where there may be better yield. So I just will say at this point, I would hope the criteria wouldn't be as fixed as that we could open that up. So I like the idea of a summit. Just say thank you. It does seem like we have to find a way to address this gap, and bringing people together is a good one, involving the important parties. I still think that City and County of Denver, we can talk about it's the hub, major. Tonight, everybody's going to downtown Denver because of the Avs game, and it remains a major employment center. But to the extent we're concentrating our services further within the City and County of Denver via both that high capacity regional backbone service that has a hub and spoke system, and through the existing core service, that you run 15 or 10-minute service and you're going to get ridership. You've got that chicken and egg thing. So I think it's worth in that summit in some way to talk about whether we can address regionally in the way that Hickenlooper and Hancock have talked about, working as a region to address the needs that we have, and not, seeing if there are dollars somehow that we can identify, or value capture that we can identify as potential new revenue sources. So thank you. That's for right now. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Director Cook. We've got two more speakers, and let's try to get through the rest of the presentation and have more questions at the end. So Director Rivera Malpiedi, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep this really short. I'd like to address Director Bouquet's issue around gentrification and equity issues. And I think that from District C, one of our biggest concerns is gentrification, and that a great number of our communities have been dispersed furthest out. It has always been my greatest concern that folks who work minimal jobs with the lowest wage fares would have to move out the furthest and pay the most to come in and cook food for folks. I will tell you that I'm also a Transportation Management Association director, and we have a partnership with the City of Denver, and we started a shuttle system in the Montbello community, and that has proven to be very, very successful. Yesterday, we served 250 people on a call ride service where we hired community members to drive these shuttles to the 8th line and to other major components in the RTD service. And I think that we are now currently trying to develop the same strategy for the Globeville, Swansea, Elyria community. But let me just always say this, because I think it's really imperative. Low-income community members who are transit dependent have always paid whatever we, the board, have deemed to them was the highest amount that they needed to pay. They have never questioned it. They have never advocated for anything more, because they are survivalists and they just need to get to and from work. And that has been the whole mission of my career and how I've wanted to work on this RTD board. I think that this issue around having a summit is our opportunity to stand up as an RTD board of directors and say, we are the transportation experts for the region, and we need you to partner with us for the good of the entire community at all levels. And we need to bring everything out to have a really, really solid conversation about the realities we're all dealing with. Because it's no longer just about getting on a bus or a train from point A to point B, but we are dealing with serious ramifications around mental health issues, around unhoused communities, and around affordable housing. But RTD and transit has become the backbone for the ability to be able to access all of those services, right? So I think this is our time to stand up and say, we're going to take the lead and we're going to move forward together in unison with the entire community, because we know our people, we know who we're serving. We know the needs of where people need to go to and come from. And we have that crucial piece that will make our communities successful, regardless of what district we're talking about. Everybody is dealing with these same issues. And I think if we can come together and lead that charge, we're going to come out of this so much stronger than we know that we are capable of doing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for those comments. Director Williams.
Go, Angie. The Avs only scored once, but Angie scored about 4 times there, because right here on my notes is the same. To note that in response to Director Whitmore, the DOTI, the Denver Office of Transit and Infrastructure, is building their own system, not just the one that Director Rivera-Malpiedi is talking about, but they are planning ahead. Boulder's been running some of their own routes for years. So, and everybody in the state of Colorado, we're not the only transit agency in the state, and other transit agencies are looking at these same issues and have had some very interesting successes. They're starting to run electric vehicles. They're starting to do first mile, last mile situations. So this discussion is relevant. I don't frankly see why we would fund anybody. I think that they should fund themselves and use us as a backbone, and use the lessons and the expertise and the service that we have already. And in terms of equity, everybody breathes the same air. When, you know, the quality of our air has nothing to do with where you live, or maybe it has something to do if you're in Larry Swansea, but it doesn't care what color you are or how much money you make. And the issues that we are facing are going to highlight RTD as being extremely equitable, that we are providing transit services, a social determinant of health to everybody in our region. And I'm with Angie. I think that our day is coming, and that all of the time that we have all been so beat up and unappreciated, RTD is safe, clean, and mostly on time. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Williams. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, in the interest of equal time, let me point out that our partnerships also include the Englewood Art and the Lone Tree Link. So I speak on behalf of Director Bouquet and myself in noting those partnerships. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks. Good points. Ms. Skeen, Ms. Buck, will you continue and conclude your presentation, please?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. We've gotten a lot of feedback. In the letter that you will be receiving from your CEO, there is contact information for me as well as Bill Soroy. If you have any additional follow-up questions, we would love to continue getting feedback on the recommendations specifically. And so outside of this conversation, I do think we got some good direction, but if anybody's interested in sharing some of that information with us, we sure would love to. We'd love to see it specifically around recommendations for the board perspectives, recommendations. It seems like there's a lot of energy and consensus around filling that funding gap. So hearing a little bit more about that, we've gotten some good discussion around there. And then getting into this concept of the significant public and stakeholder expectations. What would that look like? Is it the aspirational financial scenario that you'd be interested in pursuing? So any additional feedback that you'd be willing to share with us on those topics would be absolutely fantastic. That's a great discussion for tonight. I really only have a couple of slides left. Next steps. So we are in our study session tonight. You will be receiving the final draft SOP for your consideration, as well as an initial draft of the mobility plan for the future. We are continuing with our working group sessions. We have 2 more technical working group and advisory committees, one in June and one in August. We would love some comments on the mobility plan for the future. And again, my contact information as well as Bill Soroy's will be in the information that you will be receiving soon. And then we'll be coming back to you in July. So on the 13th, we'll come and talk a little bit about the draft SOP. And on the 26th, that will be your opportunity for the final determination of how you want to move forward with that. So we're looking forward to those meetings. And then we just wanted to leave this is something you've seen before, but just as a reminder, you know, we got into some really very specifics tonight because they were really focused on what you as a policy board, you know, should be considering at the major level. But just as a reminder, this is the vision that the project team is sort of has compiled based on feedback from all the public meetings we've had, all the working group meetings, all meetings with our elected officials, but this concept that in 2050 we are looking at RTD being an employer of choice. We recognize the workforce issue hopefully will be resolved by then, but it's something you'll always be taking into consideration. Focusing on financial health, focusing on that high quality, high capacity service, focus on those who need it most. That integrator role that we've talked a little bit about, the partnership role, we've had a lot of great discussion about that. I think that's a real key to it. But then, not forgetting some of the innovation, having RTD really be looking at leveraging emerging technologies and, to Director Williams' point, always keeping those state climate action goals in mind and how can RTD support those overall efforts. So just kind of leaving you with that vision that at least as your project team and your staff, we are envisioning for 2050, as well as some of the specifics we got into with our policy determinations tonight. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Chairman Busick. Any other questions, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. And let's get final comments or questions, please. Great. I think we had most of them just 2 minutes ago, so that's great. Seeing none, I want to thank the team for your hard work on this long process. CEO Jim Johnson, do you have anything you need to add?
No, Mr. Chair, I just echo your sentiments in reference to the project team and the hard work that they've done. I think listening to the comments that you guys brought forward, very fruitful, and look forward to the suggestions and recommendations you put forward coming to fruition, especially the summit. Thank you.
Director Williams, I see you there. Go ahead.
I'd just like to ask everybody to stick around for the next meeting.
That's right. We do have another meeting after this. So, Director Rivera-Malpiedi, go ahead.
Yes, just Avalanche 3, Bolts 1.
Woohoo!
Okay, good deal. And thanks again. And remember, directors, if you think of things after this moment, please contact the team or Mr. Saroy and forward your questions, comments, concerns. And with that, I will say, are there any other matters to come before the board for this study session? No, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Director Williams, is just a motion?
That's a motion and a 5-minute break.
Okay, it's going to be
Second
a motion.
to both of those.
Seconded to both of those. And any no votes to either of those? It's okay, good deal. So 5-minute break, come back at 7, whatever 8 and 5 is, and see you guys later.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Director Bouquet, I might need to hire you. I got a new iPhone and I am not having fun. It doesn't have a home button.
Uh-oh. Well, unfortunately, I'm an Android user, so sorry.
Sorry.
That teacher salary doesn't allow me to buy your fancy iPhones.
It's not a fancy iPhone. I had to trade my old one in because its battery wouldn't stay. So
You don't actually need a home button, as it turns out. If you want something, if you want to see what's available, you can slide down from the top. You can type in the app you're looking for, or you can slide to see the different app screens and do that. And when you're in an app, such as your messages, you just click on the message you want to see and so forth. So it really is much easier actually than having reliance upon a home button.
And were you available for coffee or cocktails anytime in the near future?
Yeah, I work cheap.
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk outside of the meeting, but yes, I read under accessibility that I didn't need a home button, but I'm not committed yet. Or maybe I should be committed yet.
All righty, should we just get started? Or do we wait for our chair, or since it's Operations and Safety Committee, which I think I might be able to get started?
You are the chair.
Is that all right? All righty. So the Operations and Safety Committee is now coming to order. We are convened as of 7:17 p.m. I would respectfully ask for everybody attending this meeting to please mute yourselves unless you're recognized to speak. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please note that under current circumstances, official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors, as mentioned earlier, are held remotely. For the immediate future, the official meetings will be held via Zoom and audio and video recorded. Are we being recorded? I don't know. Are we being? Oh, we are. Well, it says live, so I guess that means we're being recorded. Okay. Our meetings will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website, rtd-denver.com, and scroll to the bottom of the page for the link to Board of Directors page. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you'd like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I ask that you please raise your hand, your virtual hand, and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Speaking out of turn will only add confusion to the record and to the proceedings. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate they would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting, press *6. Let's now do the roll call of the committee members. So let's start off with Director Bouquet.
Present.
And Director Lewis indicated to me that she was not able to come tonight, so she's excused. Director Tisdale.
Present.
Director Williams.
Good evening, I'm still here.
And myself, I'm still here too. So for the record, I see that we have 4 directors present. Let's open up the public comment to anybody who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you'd like to speak and have not already done so, please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you are dialing in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that participating in this process, you're being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted in writing. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the committee, or any member of the public would like to submit written comments, please do so by email. You can email the board office at the following email address, rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During public comment, the committee will not offer any comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Yes, Director Williams.
Could we recognize the other board members who are not part of this committee but are here in attendance?
Most certainly. So let's see. We have Director Broom, Director Rivera-Malpiede, Director Busick, Director Sloan, Director Whitmore, Director Davidson, Director Catlin, Director Cook, and Director Geisinger, and of course, General Manager CEO Johnson and many of her staff, who we will introduce shortly. Speakers, so we're now entertaining any public comments at this time. Please begin your remarks by stating your name, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. Let's see, Barbara, do we have any speakers in the queue?
I see no hands up and we received no emails in the Outlook box.
All righty. So with no participants in the queue, we are going to close the comment period at this time. And let's see, next agenda item, information from external entities. There's no information from any external entities at this time. Recommended actions. Looks like we have 2 recommended actions on the agenda this evening. The very first is Innovations in Transportation, INIT CAD AVL software support contract. So for the board of directors to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to enter into a contract with Innovations in Transportation, INIT, for the implementation and operation of a software support contract for the computer-aided dispatch, automatic vehicle location, CAD AVL, district-wide dispatch system. The contract will include 5 years software support with 5 additional 1-year options for a total cost not to exceed $7.5 million. Do we have a motion?
So move, Bouquet.
Second.
All right. So it looks like our first 2 are moved by Director Bouquet and seconded by Director Williams. At this time, I'd like to ask, first of all, Madam General Manager, and then perhaps Michael Ford, Chief Operations Officer, and Jeff Bissing, Supervisor, Intelligent Transportation System, to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will yield the floor to Mr. Ford.
Thank you. And by the way, Director Tisdale, if you don't mind putting yourself on mute. Thank you, good sir. All righty, let's proceed.
All right, thank you. I'm Michael Ford, COO. And by way of background, I just want to emphasize that the Information Technology Division regularly works in close partnership with the Operations Department to ensure that the department's emerging technology needs continue to be addressed in real time, as well as establish a cadence and a methodology for future technological adjustments, advancing operational efficiencies, effectiveness to better serve employees and customers. One such technology is the agency's existing CAD AVL system. The CAD AVL system is currently supported by INIT and serves as a connection between the agency's revenue vehicles and scheduling and dispatch operations. Among other capabilities, the system also facilitates coordination with police, fire, medical, emergency services. Operationally, the system enhances response times, enables dispatch employee to route and supplement vehicles in real time, and enables on-time performance monitoring and automatic stop announcements. As part of the discussion with the board's adoption of this recommended action, the agency strives to meet the 2021 through 2026 strategic plan priorities of community values and customer excellence. This recommended action is to enter into a new contract with INIT for the continuation of the system software support required for the CAD AVL system functionality. As far as the financial impacts, the anticipated contract is over 10 years, including 5 base years and 5 optional years, which is at $7.5 million. There is no additional agency financial impacts, as funding designated for the CAD AVL software is included in the 2022 adopted budget. With that, I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Do any directors have any questions for Mr. Ford or anyone else? Well, seeing none, are there any no votes on this action, on this recommendation? Seeing none, the motion passes. The second recommendation is for the Allied Universal Security Services contract option. For the board of, sorry, window popped up. For the board of directors to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to execute the first option year of the existing security services contract with Allied Universal for a total contract cost not to exceed $20,296,083. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Tisdale.
Second, Williams.
So we have moved by Director Tisdale and seconded by Director Williams. I'd like to ask, first of all, General Manager, if you have any comments, but otherwise, Mr. Steve Martingano, Interim Chief of Police and Emergency Management, to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please proceed, Chief Martingano.
Thanks, Chair. I want to give a background. So Rtd Security Model consists of internal police officers, secondary employment officers from local jurisdictions, and contracted security officers to provide security for Rtd customers, facilities, and property. On July 11, 2019, following a comprehensive procurement process, Allied Universal was awarded a 3-year contract with 3 one-year options to provide system-wide security services. The initial contract term expires June 30th of 2022, and the first option year term would begin July 1st, 2022 and run to the end of June 30th of 2023. Currently, Allied Universal services provided under the contract include, but are not limited to, critical infrastructure security of facilities, including bus and rail stations, fare enforcement, patrol services, enhanced security presence during large-scale events like today's Avalanche game, integrated security technology services, security command and dispatch center staffing and monitoring. Staff recommends that the board authorize the GM CEO to execute the first of 3 contract option years with Allied Universal to provide system-wide security services. In adopting this recommended action, the agency seeks to meet the 2021 to 2026 strategic plan priorities of community value and customer excellence. Specifically, Rtd's perceived community value would be enhanced through the hiring of additional unarmed security officers to serve in an ambassador and customer service role, and the deployment of contracted security personnel in higher visibility uniforms, yielding a greater sense of security among employees, customers, and the communities the agency serves. Also, customer excellence would be achieved via the agency's ability to deploy unarmed security guards on commuter rail services, thereby improving system reliability and decreasing delays. The financial impact associated with the adoption of the recommended action is $20,296,083, of which $9,950,171 is accounted for in the 2022 budget, and a remainder would need to be incorporated into the 2023 budget. Moreover, the cost of services provided in the first contract year is $2,991,590 less than the cost of the final year of the initial 3-year contract term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martingano, for that presentation and for that information. Any directors have any questions or comments? Mr. Director Bouquet.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Chief, for the presentation. I guess my question is going to kind of go towards the bullet point, which is public for everyone regarding the community value. Could we dive a little bit deeper potentially into specifically where it says the deployment of contracted security personnel in higher visibility uniforms, yielding a greater sense of security among employees, customers, and the communities the agency serves? Specifically, why I'm asking about that is speaking with constituents, speaking with employees of RTD, and speaking with community members. It's kind of the general sense of having someone present, be it, enforcement, or be it through just having someone present as a security force, or have that interpretation. Folks, anecdotally might have a sense of safety and security. And that's why I'm kind of asking is sometimes that isn't how it's perceived, where some folks might perceive it as, oh, I'm seeing armed officers, or I'm seeing unarmed officers, anyone who's perceived as a security force of ours, just not present. And I think that I would just like a little bit more detail into, what our goals are going forward, into, there's limitations as we are all aware, but what are kind of our goals going forward with having the perception of more security forces around our RTD buses and our RTD light rails? Thank you.
Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So thanks, Director. The reason why we went to the high visibility is the old uniforms used to be the darker gray, and they were attributed more to a police type force. These are not police officers, they are security officers. We train them within their training modules to have a lot of community service aspects to understand our system. And what we wanted them to be out there in that more high visibility is for our customers, as well as individuals that maybe don't know the system, to know that they see somebody with an RTD patch on their arm. They are high visible, to go to them and ask them for, directions or assistance, or, which alignments to get to different locations. So the sense of that is more so not to be a authoritative force in that type of uniform, but what we've also learned from best practices like MARTA and some other agencies, they went to a higher visibility because, again, people want to see individuals out there representing the agency and be able to go up to them rather than being more, within a darker gray and maybe you don't see them. Our goal is not to, to be hidden within the crowd. We want to be seen within the crowd.
Thank you, Chief.
Chair, if I may.
Director Bouquet, please go on ahead.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if you would have an answer for this, and apologies for a surprise question, but would you have an answer just kind of regarding where, we can't have an individual, an unarmed officer or, a security force at every present area. We can't have it at every station that we have. If you, or potentially even the CEO or GM or Mr. Ford potentially could give, a public answer regarding, where do we put our priorities when it comes down to our security forces, or just, I kind of like it just, how you worded it is just an individual that, has a help or authority, for if, a first-time rider comes up and says, hey, I have questions, and I could actually turn to an RTD employee. My question is just kind of regarding disbursement of, these resources, when sometimes folks might feel that there isn't someone present. I'm just curious, what is kind of our strategies when it comes down to where do we actually place individuals?
And let's go to the General Manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, for this answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief Martingano, for your presentation and the responses, and to Director Bouquet for the questions. I think they're very good ones. And I would share, oftentimes as we look at safety and security, is the perception, right? Because somebody could be in an environment that is surrounded with, different security personnel and feel unsafe. But to get to the issue in which you raised, as we look at priorities holistically, what we are trying to become here at this organization is a data-focused organization, because we need to have data sets in order to inform our decisions as we go forward. Being in this forum with you all and in public settings in which I've had the chance to engage, we have been promoting, for instance, the Transit Watch app. because basically this type of information that we can garner for that basically gives us the opportunity to ascertain where we should deploy resources. More so as we work with our frontline staff, and I mean not just operators. I'm talking about people working on the right of way. I'm talking about our customer service agents and things of the like. We can garner a better understanding where that may need to be. To the chief's credit, and I'll yield the floor to him momentarily to talk about this, but when he stepped into this role, we went forward with our high impact teams, basically by having them working toward the different modalities focused on bus and rail, not just vehicles, but it stops, and looking at the population that is unhoused. And this is a model that's typically used within transit agencies that have a police force. And more specifically, when we talk about this collectively, we are leveraging the information that we were able to ascertain when we had the American Public Transportation Association do an assessment, because a lot of the elements that have spawned from that are in the process of being implemented. When they talk to us about a paid fare area and what might we do in the collaboration going forward, and how we should have a holistic approach in dealing with jurisdictions and partnering, recognizing that we can't enforce our way through anything, but we need to have that firm compassion. So as we talk about the priorities, it's not being done in a vacuum. It's through the work of Interim Chief Martin Gano, engaging with a multitude of jurisdictions, Mr. Ford with his collaboration, leading various subgroups as it relates to creating an environment where our employees feel safe. So that's the prioritization based upon the data sets that we're getting, looking at that and informed decisions. So if I may yield the floor to Chief Martin Gano to elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam General Manager. Chief?
Yeah, I know everything the CEO said is 100% accurate, right? What we're trying to do is to find out where to best deploy our resources. We have seen that already with the bus and rail impact teams. I had spoken to Fox 31 News today. They had asked questions about the impact that the bus impact team is having out there. Our officers, since April 3rd, when that deployment has come, they have reached out and contacted over 260 bus operators at different bus stops, different locations. And this is all garnered from bus safety meetings, the work that Mr. Ford does in regards to our bus assault team committee meetings. So as the more and more data we get, and the more and more information that we need to go out and be present at, that's what we're hoping for. And again, the visibility of the higher visibility uniforms. We want individuals to see, our security personnel out there when they are out there, and know that they are RTD personnel. They're reflective to what our uniforms are, and for them to go up to help. I will just say, I was at the security roundtable meeting in San Diego. They were asking about, there's about 20 plus agencies there, asking about what individuals do for mental health illness. Does anyone have clinicians? RTD, I was able to raise my hand. Does anyone have homeless outreach coordinators? Able to raise our hand. Does anyone have security personnel that are highly visible? I was able to raise my hand. So RTD, I think, is well ahead of the game in establishing a security sense, as well as providing safety for our customers.
And thank you, Chief. If I may, just sort of drilling down, Chief, there's been a lot of media attention regards to the 15 bus. If you don't mind drilling down, just sort of addressing that, given the comments by our general manager and yourself on how we're placing and how we're using data.
Sure, Chair. Thanks for that question. We provide a lot of resources to the 15 along Colfax. We have our secondary employment contract with Aurora Police Department, and we have officers that are to ride buses, especially along the 15 corridor, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also have a deployment of Denver police officers, not only within vehicles throughout 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but we also have an additional 3 Denver police officers that are directed to address any bus issues, whether it be the 15, Evans, or Broadway. So they are out there anywhere from 4 to 5 days a week. Our bus impact team has been present along Colfax, especially along more the west side of Colfax, from Sheridan further out west, just because we have so much police involvement and along Denver and Aurora. So we wanted to make sure that we covered, Colfax is a very long strip, right? It's one of the largest roads in the country. So we wanted to make sure that we covered the west side of Colfax as well and didn't neglect those bus operators. And then also our security personnel, when we have a abundance of security, we put them out there. They sometimes ride with our bus supervisors. They go out along the bus alignments as well. So we dedicate a lot. And one thing that has not been spoken about is our camera system. RTD places a lot of money as well as emphasis on video. We have a lot of cameras within the areas, so that's another tool that has not been expressed here as well.
Thank you, Chief, and my apologies, Director Tisdale, that I interrupted before you. Go on ahead, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. You have hit some of the points I was going to make, and I think it's important that we all realize we've had a series of articles about safety and security in the local press, but then we had a scathing indictment in the Washington Post relative to the operation of our 1515L line on Colfax Avenue that appeared just 2 weeks ago, which was very troubling and very problematic and ended on a very depressing and non-optimistic note, just indicating what happened to that particular operator and not saying what RTD was doing about all of this. Then, of course, we had the 7 News story that we just saw today, I guess, or yesterday, relative to the 1515L again. And then, of course, we heard about the Fox 31 interview that the chief gave. I think it's critical for us to make it clear, and adopting this resolution and approving this contract and sending it to the full board is part of the response that we need to make. And I do want to thank the chief very much for continuing to emphasize my favorite app, which is, if you see something, say something, the RTD Transit Watch app. I will remind you yet once again, folks, if you have the RTD Transit Watch app on your phone, you'll never ride alone. So I am very happy to support this action this evening, and I hope that we can get good press out of it so that people understand that, yes, we are renewing and reinvigorating our investment in safety and security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Thank you, Director Tisdale. Chief, did you want to comment any further on that or not? So in regards to the app, from my understanding, actually, there's now another menu item on there to include drugs. Is that correct? And so that's also going to help inform our data and also how we respond to events that people are reporting. Is that correct, Mr. Martingano?
Yes, Chair, that is correct. I apologize. I don't have the date in front of me when we first put that classification on there, but that actually came from a customer. A customer had called in asking, I utilized the app the other day and I wanted to be specific to drugs, but I had to use the other classification to talk about something that I had seen along the alignment. So as soon as we heard that, we then reached right out to our app person that designed the app, and they placed that, and that has been a classification that now people are able to go ahead and utilize. So it was a great addition. It gives us better numbers in regards to what our customers and our employees are seeing out there and whoever downloads the app, and we'll continue to make those changes as drug activity was not a huge issue several years ago. So if anything else does come up, we'll continue to change that app as needed.
I appreciate that, and I know this conversation is drifting a bit from the contract, but the safety and security issue is all encompassing with the people that we are hiring. So I think it is germane. So speaking to that, Chief, do you believe that this action will adequately help us recruit and retain the necessary staff, both armed and unarmed, to provide the security that we need, or at least help us to start addressing it?
Chair, yes, for several reasons. One is this now gives a step system for within the contract by having the unarmed positions. If individuals stay on their contract, retention wise, they also then can advance to the armed position, which would then give them a higher salary rate. And also, they don't have the employee ownership, within their strategic plan, but I think that is definitely something that, could be expressed, because they will start off, being unarmed, understanding, be more that customer service aspect. And if they want to make more money, they could go to that armed faction, but they continue to understand, that customer service is first. And I think, and it also will get individuals more into the security field, because the armed qualifications are a little bit higher standards. So they'll get people to come and be able to work within RTD's umbrella, in a different faction. So
if I understood, sorry, Director Bouquet, just real quick, if I understood correctly, we will be saving about $3 million versus last year's contract. And part of that is due to the hiring of unarmed staff. Given that we will be saving some money, do you think that we could pay more for both armed and unarmed staff in this contract in order to hopefully help attract and retain those contractors? General Manager.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I raised my hand intentionally, recognizing that we're coming before the board as it relates to putting forth an option year. This contract was approved and went through a solicitation process back in July of 2019, whereby with open and fair competition, there was a price model that already was submitted. So recognizing that it is a contractor, while there are savings, it would not be within RTD's auspices per se to dictate what the salary rate should be for a contractor, if that makes sense to you. So as we go forward and look at this, there are various aspects where everybody's trying to be competitive as we go forward. But, as relates to what might happen in reference to the contractor in and of itself, that's not within the purview of RTD per se in relationship to where we are with the current contractual agreement that we have with this vendor.
Understood. Thank you, General Manager. Director Bouquet.
Thanks, Chair, for another bite of the apple. I guess my question would be, as we're looking into this contract, is our goals as an agency, are our goals as an agency to be proactive of our placement of our personnel, or reactive, or is it truly a mixture of both? I think that would be kind of my question, because again, the comments and questions that I've gotten from constituents is regarding just the presence of that authority figure, or when it comes down to an RTD personnel, are we reacting to the Transit Watch app, or and it most likely is a hybrid, but I am just kind of curious going forward, what are going to be kind of our goals as an agency?
General Manager.
Thank you so much. And as we talk about where we're going as an agency and talk about goals and priorities, I do want to be able to opine. So collectively, as we talk about where we are, we do have people power problems, as we've talked about ad nauseum. And as we go forward, we want to ensure that we have adequate resources. When you look at the size of this agency in comparison to others, we have a very small police force. And that was something that came out of our APTA peer review. And recognizing that we do rely heavily upon a third party in a utopian society, we would like to move forward where we have auspices, because recognizing that we have security personnel that serve as second crew members, and we need to have greater deployment of resources, we would be better apt to do that. And so as we have been working collectively, and it's been a cross-functional team ranging from our colleagues within the Transit Police Division, within operations, more specifically as it relates to rail, both on light rail and commuter rail, we have been talking about what might be optimal. And I believe in reference to the question that you posed, Director Bouquet, one of those first instances is how we look at, deployment on the inline. And one thing's for certain, what we're working towards is ensuring that we have RTD conductors on board, right? As opposed to being reliant upon a third party that was carrying, a firearm. And so as we talk about this collectively, it's looking at the business models that we were utilizing and trying to optimize on the resources we have for the betterment of the services in which we're providing. So those are the priorities in which we have collectively. And I would yield the floor to Chief Martingano and Mr. Ford to elaborate, since they have been working on this collectively with their teams to effectuate this going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Ford, Mr. Martingano.
Yeah, it's Michael Ford, COO. I just wanted to elaborate that we have graduated 9 conductors as of yesterday. We've got another 3 that are scheduled to be graduating in the next couple of weeks, and another class going. That should provide some relief. The 9 are actually out in service right now to help with some of the things that we've been experiencing. We're continuing to try to build up our workforce, and we hope that that will come to full distribution here in the coming months. But we have been actively working on this and trying to provide additional resources out there, and maybe that can help augment some of the concerns that have been raised.
You should give them a heads up. There might be unhappy people on the train. We're in a tie game now.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No. No. Mr. Martingano, did you have any other further comment?
No, I don't, Chair. Thank you.
All righty. Any other directors would like to ask a question or make a statement or what have you? All righty. Let's take a look. So let's vote. And are there any no votes on this action? Seeing none, it passes unanimously 4-0. So there are discussion items. There are no discussion items this evening. Other matters? Are there any other matters to discuss? Anybody? Director Williams.
That's just me sticking my hand up to say there are other directors on this call. If anybody has a question or wants to bring up anything, we welcome you to participate in our committee.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for pointing that out. Director Whitmore? No? Okay, so you just popped up. Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for bringing that up. Looks like there are no other matters to discuss. So it looks like our next meeting is Wednesday, July 13th. That'll be a Wednesday. And at this moment, I'd like to take a motion to adjourn.
I'll adjourn. Go Avs.
Go Avs. Thank you, everyone, for all of your hard work. I really appreciate it very much. Thank you. Have a good night.